Subscribe to our channel and hit the bell icon so that you know when live we go. Hello and welcome to today's DNS session. We are going to have a discussion on the explained articles. We shall take up articles which are relevant for civil service examination and discuss them as per the demand of the exam. We shall discuss this explained article, What are Green Jobs?, mentioned by the Prime Minister in his Environment Day speech. See, recently at an event to mark World Environment Day, Prime Minister Modi spoke about India's effort to create green jobs. And he said that this was just another aspect of climate change mitigation efforts, although a crucial one. So, as the title of the article is, What are Green Jobs? As you can intuitively think yourself, that a green job would refer to a class of jobs that directly have a positive impact on the planet and contribute to the overall environmental welfare, right? Like jobs involving renewable energy, conservation of resources, jobs related with energy efficiency. They all should be categorized as green jobs. Overall, green jobs are aimed at reducing the negative environmental impact of economy and furthering the process of creating low carbon based economy. This is something that you can write on even without knowing the standard definition. But United Nations Environment Program does provide a standard definition for green jobs which goes like this. A green job is one which makes minimum negative impact on the environment relative to the status quo, thereby making enterprises and sectors more sustainable. Green job is directly linked with sustainability. The phrase green is related with environment, and job is crucial both economically and socially. So, with these two terms, green and job, environment, economy, and society comes together. And that's effectively what sustainability is. But the crossover between green and non green sectors are very fluid. We have to look at various environmental technologies involved in creating services and goods and also the process involved. And hence, different jobs may have different shades of green. Accordingly, there are no generally recognized statistics that would allow for comparison to be drawn between sectors or different countries or in different time scale. There is no global indicator presently that defines the greeniness of the economy. But however, still, if we have to do some analysis on the greeniness of the economy, we can distinguish different jobs based upon output and process. From the output perspective, green jobs refer to the jobs in companies and sectors which produce goods and services that are either environmental goods or relatively environmentally friendly goods. And from the process perspective, the definition goes beyond this. It covers all the employment that seeks to improve the environmental impact of companies, even those companies that does not produce environmental goods. To make things a little more clear, let's discuss some of the examples of green jobs. Suppose a company is involved in the technological development that will be deployed to reduce the loss of water. It may be through sensors detecting the leakage. It could be a laser-based system or ultrasound-based system that will detect the crack in the pipelines, or any other technology that will help in reducing the water loss, thereby increasing the productivity. So employment in such a company, such an enterprise, obviously will be counted as green jobs. But green jobs may not always be so direct. If there is an enterprise, NGO, or in any other community-based program that has some social engagement to increase the participation of communities, maybe in the design and construction of water supply infrastructure, maybe, or if they are involved in water management, then that is also counted as green jobs. And if people are involved in helping increase the hygiene of an area or imparting sanitation education in the communities, then that is also green job. There was a project named as Pipo project in Kenya. This project was to develop single-use hygienic toilet bags. These toilet bags can be knotted and buried. On burial, it gets decomposed and turned into fertilizer. The program overall included the production, distribution, and the collection services, creating thousands of jobs. This program started way back in 2008, the year around which the term green jobs were actually popularized by ILO. The program involved women micro entrepreneurs, which also helped socially empowering the women, helped the economy of the area, developed green based technology, and also environment-friendly products. Projects like these produces green jobs. Green jobs are actually part of green economy. If investment planning and executions are done to encourage green economy in a nation, then obviously green jobs will grow. Green jobs holds the promise that mankind presently is facing. It's a twin challenge of our time. One is to avert the dangerous and potentially unmanageable climate change, and thereby protecting the natural environment which supports life on Earth. And the second is to provide decent work and hence the prospect of well being and dignity. These two are the challenges of our time, fighting climate change and decent work that has dignity. Additionally, UNEP's emission gap report, this was released in 2019. It says that it is essential for greenhouse gas emission to be reduced by 7.6% per annum between 2020 to 2030 for the Paris Agreement targets to be met. If we fail on this target of cutting down the greenhouse gas emission, then we will fail to combat global warming. So we need a decarbonized economy. We should move towards green economy. And green economy will usher green jobs, and focusing on green jobs will help propel the green economy. Green economy and green jobs will affect the employment in various ways. First, they may result in the creation of new jobs. For example, pollution control devices, environmental consulting services, etc. Second, it may result in substitution of some jobs. For example, renewable energy jobs substituting the fossil fuel jobs. Third, it may result in the elimination of some jobs without direct replacement, such as when packaging materials are discouraged. Now, you must have observed that paper straws are coming in your drinks. The plastic straws and the plastic packages, plastic glasses, plates, and spoons, they all will be replaced, phased out. The fourth impact is on the reorientation and reskilling of the existing job, such as reskilling that may be required in the construction sector when we'll deal with new environment-friendly materials and environment-friendly designs. These changes in the employment for the green jobs were already foreseen by ILO, and there was already a global job pact in 2010. The pact recommended increasing green production and services as an important tool for creating jobs and stimulating sustained economic activity. Recognizing the importance of green jobs in the economy, Government of India set up Skill Council for Green Jobs in 2015 as a not-for-profit independent industry-led initiative. Skill Council for Green Jobs does not come under any ministry because it's an industry-led initiative, but it is promoted by Ministry of New and Renewable Energy and the Confederation of Indian Industry. Skill Council for Green Jobs has aligned its activities and goals with National Skill Development Mission. The overall target is to create an ecosystem where Indian manufacturers and service providers have a collaborative skill push so that we realize the potential of green jobs. The long and short of it is this: climate change is a reality. To fight climate change, we need reduction in emissions. For this, we require green economy. And green economy essentially requires green jobs. But it is not always linear flow like this. Investing in green jobs, skill developments, reskilling is actually essential for green economy to be propelled. So it's not that green economy will come in existence first and then green jobs. They are mutually reinforcing. There is an explained article how the president is elected. Well, the process of presidential election already has been covered in detail in DNS. We shall do here something which has not been already covered and which is also part of our syllabus for the mains exam of paper 2, which is comparison of Indian constitution with other constitutions. So effectively here, we shall discuss the office of President of US and India, which otherwise also keeps appearing in the news.
The American president is both the head of the state and head of the government. As the head of the state, he occupies a ceremonial position, and as head of the government, he leads the executive organ of the government. In India, president is the nominal head. He is the head of the executive, but the real power lies in the hands of Prime Minister. So in that sense, the real head of executive is Prime Minister. We can say President is the head of the executive and Prime Minister is the head of the government. In United States of America, President has a fixed tenure of 4 years. and he can seek re-election only once. So a person can become president only twice. In India, the president has a fixed term of 5 years and he can be re-elected any number of times. An important feature of parliamentary form of government is legislative responsibility. The Council of Ministers headed by Prime Minister is collectively responsible to Lok Sabha. Executive is responsible to the lower house, that is legislative responsibility. But responsibility comes not of President directly, but the Council of Ministers headed by Prime Minister. In case of United States of America, there is no legislative responsibility because that is not a parliamentary form of government. It's a presidential form of government based on the doctrine of separation of power. The legislative, executive and judiciary are completely separate. In India, the executive is part of legislature. Council of Ministers headed by Prime Minister is the executive organ. But they also sit in parliament, participate in the parliamentary proceedings, they participate in lawmaking. In the United States of America, the working of Congress is completely detached with that of President. The most important comparison to make is the veto power of President of US and India. See, the head of executives in modern democracy enjoy 4 kinds of veto power. Absolute veto power meaning you say no to the bill, meaning you will not sign the bill. Qualified veto means you can say no, return the bill, but your no will be overridden by the legislature with a higher majority. Meaning if the bill was originally passed by simple majority, the next time if the bill is passed by 2/3 majority, then the president has no option but to sign the bill. But suppose the bill fails to be repassed by 2/3 majority. In that case, the president would have exercised qualified veto. Similar to qualified veto is suspensive veto, meaning the president will return the bill, but if the legislature repasses the bill by an ordinary majority, then the president has no option but to sign the bill. In case of suspensive veto, it is easy for the legislature to get it passed because it does not demand a higher majority. You just have to pass it again by the simple majority. Pocket veto is said to be the case in scenario where president is not taking any action, and because of that, the bill is not getting passed. In absolute veto, you say no to it. In pocket veto, it is not clear what's going on. The president is just not taking the action. In India, because the bills mostly are presented in the parliament on recommendation of president, so absolute veto is not exercised independently by the president. But in case of a state's bill or private member bill, the president of India can exercise absolute veto. He can say no to it. But if a government has presented a bill, generally absolute veto is not exercised by the president. But the power to exercise absolute veto as such is there with Indian president. Article 111 of Indian Constitution governs the veto power of the president. It reads like this: when a bill is passed by houses of parliament, it shall be presented to the president and president shall declare either that he assents to the bill or he withdraws assent therefrom. And then the article further adds that the president may return the bill as soon as possible. But the catch here is how soon and what is soon, that has not been specified. So this gives the scope to the president to take as much time as he wants. And that creates a scenario of pocket veto. The article also says, however, if the houses enact the bill with or without amendment and present it to the president for assent, the president shall not withhold assent therefrom. Meaning the president of India enjoys suspensive veto. The bill goes back and if repassed, then the president has to sign it. It does not require higher majority, so there is no question of qualified veto in Indian case because there is suspensive veto. Regarding veto power of Indian president, I must tell you that president has no veto power in respect to constitutional amendment bill. The 24th Constitutional Amendment Bill of 1971 made it obligatory for the president to give assent in case of constitutional amendment bill. And the practice of exercising veto power is also very rare. For example, suspensive veto has been exercised only once by President APJ Abdul Kalam in case of Office of Profit Bill. And pocket veto also has been used only once by President Gyani Zail Singh in case of Indian Post Office Amendment Bill at the time of Rajiv Gandhi government. Absolute veto has been practiced twice. Once in 1954 by President Dr. Rajendra Prasad, and this was done in context of province, the erstwhile province of Patiala and East Punjab State Union. Because it was the state bill and it was of nature that was to be reserved for President assent, the President could exercise absolute veto. In another instance, President R. Venkatraman exercised absolute veto, but this time it was bill of the Parliament. However, the bill was passed on the last day before the Lok Sabha was dissolved, and it was introduced without seeking prior recommendation from the President. That is why in this case it was possible for the President to exercise absolute veto. There are two things here. First, prior recommendation from President was not taken. Secondly, the House was dissolved. If the House is dissolved, the President cannot return the bill to the House. In that case, if President do not give assent to the bill, it becomes an absolute veto. So we have learned by now that President of India is vested by three veto powers: absolute veto, suspensive veto, and pocket veto. We also have learned that in case of constitutional amendment bill, President does not enjoy pocket veto. He has to take action. And in case of money bill, there is no suspensive veto. That means President cannot send the bill back to the Parliament for reconsideration, because money bill are introduced in the Parliament on recommendation of President. So that does not make sense. In case of United States, President has to take action within 10 days. Either he has to give assent or he has to exercise veto. So as such, there is pocket veto, but the pocket is very small. President can exercise the veto power, he can return back the bill, but if Congress repass the bill with 2/3 majority, then it will be considered passed. That means the President of United States enjoy qualified veto. If he is vetoing a bill, then the Congress needs a higher majority. So if there is qualified veto with U.S. President, then there will be no suspensive veto. There are other differences in the power. For example, you know that India is a federal polity, but India is quasi-federal. Federalism in the United States of America is very strong. In Indian context, certain state bills need to be reserved for presidential assent, but there is no such provision in case of United States. Since India is a parliamentary form of government, the President can dissolve the lower house, but since US is a presidential form of government and there is a strict separation of power, President cannot dissolve the lower house. So much of differentiation between Indian and US President will suffice for our exam.
There is an explained article on bond yield.
Let's begin to understand this piece by piece. First of all, bond yield very simplistically is the return that an investor gets on the bond that he or she has purchased. Suppose investor A buys a bond of rupees 100 and the coupon rate is rupees 5. And suppose this is a 10-year bond. This means that every year the investor A is going to get rupees 5 as interest, and at the end of 10 years, rupees 100, the principal, will be returned back. The interest rate that Mr. A is getting every year is rupees 5 on the investment of rupees 100, which means that the bond return rate is 5% or the bond yield is 5%. Now suppose that Mr. A wants to sell off this bond. This financial decision that Mr. A is taking can come out of various reasons. One reason could be that Mr. A is getting jittery about the economy. He thinks that everything is going to be doomed, so better to hedge the loss. And suppose Mr. A wants to sell the bond at rupees 99. Everybody has different financial and economic outlook. There would be a buyer for this bond at rupees 99 because the buyer may look at things differently. And if Mr. A sells the bond to Mr. B, the buying rate for Mr. B is rupees 99. The coupon rate of the bond will remain the same, still rupees 5. So every year Mr. B now is going to get rupees 5, but the investment is only of rupees 99. Return will be higher, which in this case will be 5.05%. The bond yield for Mr. B has increased. The bond yield in general, if the bond starts to get sold off at lower price, will increase. If the bond price decreases, the bond yield increases. Remember this relation, bond yield is inversely proportional to bond price. Selling the bond at lower price could also come for other reasons. For example, Mr. A now see opportunity in investment elsewhere, where the return on investment is higher. The return on government securities are generally low because they are safe investment. If the economy starts to pick up, then investment in equities could be more lucrative. Investment in gold can give higher return, or investment in real estate, wherever. So for that reason also, Mr. A might want to sell off the bond at lower price, take away his money and invest somewhere else so that he makes more profit. But if for some reason the demand for government securities starts to increase, maybe the economy now is not doing well and investing in government securities is the safest choice. Suppose Mr. C purchases the bond from Mr. A at rupees 101. The coupon rate will still remain the same, rupees 5, and Mr. C will get an annual return of rupees 5 on an investment of rupees 101, which will be lower than 5%, 4.95%. But still not bad. For Mr. C, it is good enough, it is safe, economy is not doing well, and you are getting 4.95% return, it is good. So Mr. C will go for it. But if bond yield has decreased, you must take note that the bond price has increased. Bond price now is 101. Or to say otherwise, if the bond yield has decreased, the demand for the bond has increased. And can I say, if the bond yield has increased, that means the demand for the bond has decreased. That means the investors have other opportunities, other avenues for investment. By extrapolation, can I also say that economy now has started to do well. Understand this. RBI releases government securities, raises money for the government. This is done in the primary market. Investors come to the primary market and purchases government securities. Securities are given by the process of bidding. The one that bids for lowest bond yield, securities are given to them. Investors purchase government security from primary market and go to the secondary market and sell them off to retail investors. This is what investors do. They are not here to purchase 10 years bond to hold it for 10 years and just earn 5% or whatever interest on that. They are here to make quick money. They will buy it from primary market, sell it off in the secondary market. That's how they make quick money. This is mostly done by foreign institutional investors. They are not going to stay in the market for long. What happened recently in the US after the rollout of vaccine, economy was beginning to come on track. US economy showed sign of recovery and investors got elated. They wanted to invest in the economy. They wanted to give money to the corporates, earn higher return. Because the interest rate in the government bonds in the treasury bills of US would be very, very low. So the money will now go to the market at the cost of government. So the treasury bill that the Fed, the central bank of US, was releasing will have less takers now. Because the money gone from the bond market to the equity market, to the stock exchanges, money will be now given to the corporates. Money can also now be given in the form of venture capital, angel funding, or in the real estate. Because of lesser demand in the primary market, the bond price will decrease. It's basically fund of demand supply. Demand has decreased for the bond, so the prices will fall down. If the bond price decreases, meaning the bond yield will increase. So the bond yield started to increase in US when the economy began to come back on track. But the thing is, economy began to come back on track because of higher expenditure by the US government. Higher expenditure essentially means now the government will have to borrow more. Meaning US government will have to request to the Fed to release more government securities. But the bond yield now has increased. Meaning the effective rate of return on those bonds have increased. Now when the Fed will release the bonds in primary market, auctioning will be done, and the auctioning will be done as per the prevailing bond yield in the market. Or to see it other way around, when the auctioning will be done by the Fed, there are less takers, there is less demand. So the Fed will have to offer higher bond yield. So the US government will have to pay higher interest rate. Borrowing for the US government will now become expensive. That is why increased bond yield in the US market becomes a big news. Now let's see what happened in India. When the bond yield in US increased, that means that the market of US is doing pretty well. That means that the FII who came to India when the economy was down in US will go back like flies to the US market. Since the bond yield has increased now, they can also invest in the US government bond, the treasury bills. So the hot money that came through FII now is going to just fly. So the takers of government securities now released by RBI will be less. And also the investors who were in Indian market in the stock market, in NSE, in BSE, they are also now going to go away. That is why when the bond yield in US increased, that resulted in slump in the Sensex and also Nifty. There was almost a crash in Indian stock market because FII took the money and went back. Although the stock market now has recovered and is heading towards a fresh high, it's a different issue because DII, domestic institutional investor, started to invest in stock market as FII, foreign institutional investor, went back. But this is the link. When the yield in US market increases, money goes back to the US. And you also understand that the fiscal deficit forecast in the budget is high. Government borrowing is high. Government is now planning to borrow 12 lakh crore, which means that the RBI will be flooding many government securities in the primary market. So because of higher supply of government securities, the prices again is going to go down. If the demand decreases, prices decreases. If the supply increases, prices will again decrease. Simple demand supply funda. Now understand, the investor who is holding the bond right now knows it very well that the market will be flooded by government security and the prices will go down. So even before the RBI has actually flooded government security in the market, the investor will sell off the bond. Just like if you know that there has been bumper harvest and the crop is still in the field, but ultimately it's going to come to the market. And when so much of crop will come to the market, the prices will decrease. So the wholesaler, whatever amount he is holding, will quickly sell off the bond. The same thing will happen here. Because of the budget forecast, immediately after the budget, the investors started to sell off the bond, obviously at lower price. So the bond prices started to decrease. That means the bond yield will increase. So the bond yield in Indian market also started to increase. And hence we saw in the beginning, when the bond yield in United States started to increase, that was quickly followed by other emerging economy including India. And bond yield in India touched 6.2%. So now you also understand that the bond yield is dependent on fiscal position of government. It is also dependent on global market. We discussed in the beginning that when bond yield is increasing, that is a signal of economy doing well. Because now the buyer of government bond are less. Meaning they have other opportunities in the market, so the market must be doing well. If the market is doing well, economy will be in the run, then the inflation will increase. And if inflation increases, then the monetary policy of the central bank have to be adjusted such that rising inflation is arrested, which means that the policy rate will have to be increased. If policy rate is increased, it will become even more difficult for the government to borrow. Government will be forced to flood the primary market with more government securities. That will decrease in even higher bond yield. If the policy rate is decreased, then the borrowing will be eased. The government will be less dependent on borrowing from the market. Supply of government security will decrease and the increasing bond yield can be arrested. RBI cannot decrease the policy rate. When the economy is performing very well, there is very high risk of inflation and inflationary pressure on Indian economy has not decreased. When inflation remains high, policy rate cannot be cut. Without cutting the policy rate, we'll have to look for ways and means to decrease the bond yield. And that is done through a special open market operation, sometimes referred to as Operation Twist. Generally what happens in open market operation is RBI sell or buy the government securities. When it sells the government security, it pumps out money from the market. It pumps in money to the market. But in the special open market operation, Operation Twist, RBI purchases long-term government securities and sells short-term government securities simultaneously. When RBI sells short-term government security, RBI gets money. With that money, RBI purchases long-term government security. So two parallel open market operations happen simultaneously, and the net effect is this, that RBI is selling short-term government security and buying long-term government security. When RBI is buying long-term government security, then the supply of long-term government security in the market will decrease. When the supply decreases, you would understand that the bond price will increase. And if the bond price increases, the bond yield would decrease. This is what we wanted, to decrease the bond yield of long-term government security to less than 6%. But however, since RBI is selling short-term government security, so there will be increase in supply of short-term government security. When there is increased supply, there will be decrease in the price. If bond price decreases, the bond yield will increase. But that is okay, because when the government is going to borrow to finance the fiscal deficit, it is going to be done through long-term government security. So the bond yield of long-term G-Secs is more important. So before the government started to borrow, before RBI floated government security in the market, it was important that the bond yield of long-term government security be decreased. Otherwise, the government will have to pay higher interest rate for borrowing. And that goal has been achieved through Operation Twist. This is the motive of Operation Twist. But you might be thinking that the bond yield of long-term government security could have been simply decreased by purchasing them. Why did you sell short-term government security? Because this way there is no net injection of money or pumping out of money. RBI has neither increased nor decreased the money supply. So there will be no inflationary effect on the economy. That is what we intended to do. We didn't want to decrease the repo rate. We didn't want to change any other policy rate. We did not want to have any inflationary effect on the economy and yet decrease the bond yield of long-term government security, which was important to do, and we have done it because the fiscal deficit this financial year, 9.5%, government is to borrow 12 lakh crore rupees. And if the bond yield would have been increased, RBI also would have to offer higher yield to the investors for the new government securities. And that would mean higher borrowing cost for the government. When the bond yield of long-term government security increases, then the investors also demand higher yields on corporate bonds. So the borrowing cost for the corporates will also automatically increase. And as we have discussed before, when the bond yield increases, investors go from the equity market to the debt market. The money go from the stock market to the bond market. And this has adverse impact on the equity market, on the stock exchanges. As we saw a rapid fall in the Sensex and Nifty as the bond yield in US and India started to increase. It is important that the stock market function well because there the retail investors, you and me, can invest very easily. Banks also link their interest rate with the long-term government security yield. As the yield increases, the interest rate increases, and hence there is decrease in the credit creation in the economy. So it is the long-term government security yield that must be checked, and that is what is done exactly by Operation Twist without impacting economy in any other way.
There is an explained article why China is cracking down on Hong Kong's memorialization of the Tiananmen Square massacre. Look, from the perspective of international relation, you need to first understand as to what is the relation between China and Hong Kong. Hong Kong is technically part of China and it operates as a semi-autonomous city. To understand why and how, we have to go back towards the end of 18th century when China was fighting series of war with Britain. Chinese lost and they have to cede Hong Kong to Britishers for a period of 99 years. Hong Kong remained in the hands of British until 1997 when Britishers handed Hong Kong back to China, but under a unique agreement. And this agreement gave a mini constitution to Hong Kong, which is called as Basic Laws. And because of this basic law, the relation between China and Hong Kong is operated by a principle called as one country, two system. Under one country, two system, Hong Kong will retain high degree of autonomy, and democratic freedoms are enjoyed by citizens of Hong Kong, which are not enjoyed by mainland Chinese citizens. For instance, right to vote, which is also customarily there in the mainland China, but since there is no multi-party democracy, so it doesn't mean anything. Citizens of Hong Kong also enjoy freedom of speech, freedom of press and publication, freedom of assembly, of procession and demonstration. These rights are guaranteed to the citizens of Hong Kong. There is also a provision of independent judiciary. All matters in civil and criminal jurisprudence will be decided in the courts of Hong Kong, and courts of Hong Kong will be final authority on these matters. The cases will not go to mainland China. However, it's very crucial for you to know that this agreement was not to last forever. And in the agreement itself, it was envisaged that by 2047, after 50 years of agreement, Hong Kong would be fully part of mainland China. But Chinese are not willing to wait for so long, and they have started to assert their authority, although illegally, already in Hong Kong. In 2003, China attempted to push a legislation through the Legislative Council of Hong Kong that would punish the citizens for criticizing China. In 2014, citizens had to protest in large numbers on streets against China's influence in election in Hong Kong. Then in 2019, massive protests broke out in Hong Kong against the extradition bill that was being pushed in the Legislative Council of the Hong Kong that will give rights to China to extradite the accused from Hong Kong to China. This was seen as the gross violation of human rights in Hong Kong and a step to impinge into the autonomy of Hong Kong, because Hong Kong has been given an independent judiciary by the agreement. So that extradition treaty will actually be violative of the rights of peoples of Hong Kong. To understand how China is able to get through its agenda in Hong Kong, you have to understand the political system in Hong Kong. In Hong Kong, the head of the government is called as the chief executive. And the chief executive is not directly elected by people, rather it is selected by a small committee. And the name of the chief executive is cleared by China. Executive have no control over the laws. There is a strict separation of power. The laws are made by Legislative Council. There it is famously called as LegCo. This LegCo has 70 seats. And ever since the agreement was made in 1997, the pro-democratic parties, they always dominate in the election. But however, the pro-China parties, they are always in majority. And because of this, it is easy for the executive to have control over the legislature, and indirectly, it is easy for China to have control over Hong Kong. The reason why pro-Chinese political parties dominate in the legislature, even though pro-democratic parties outperform in every election, is that election does not happen in all 70 seats. Election only happen for 40 seats. So majority of these 40 seats goes to pro-democratic parties, but in the rest of the 30 seats, it is actually outperformance of pro-Chinese parties. The reason is, the rest of the 30 seats, they are chosen by the business class. For instance, the financial sector, the medical sector, the insurance sector, they have number of seats reserved for their representative. And the business representatives, they are pro-China. So all in all, the LegCo is dominated by pro-Chinese parties. However, this arrangement was not to be forever. Article 68 of the agreement between the British and the Chinese in 1997 envisaged that the ultimate aim is that election for all members of the LegCo should be held by universal suffrage. But this transition never happened, and the LegCo of Hong Kong technically can pass anything they wish, which will be pro-China. But because of the protests that people do on the street, some of the steps by the LegCo are stifled, and democracy still is preserved in Hong Kong. The present issue is related with national security legislation. Actually, as per the agreement, as per the basic law according to which the Hong Kong is governed largely, Hong Kong has the right to executive, legislative and independent judicial power, including the right to final adjudication, barring matters on defense and foreign affairs. In this regard, there is Article 23. Article 23 of the basic law requires Hong Kong to pass national security legislation. But the past attempt has triggered massive protest, and Hong Kong LegCo has not passed national security legislation yet. So legislation that China is bringing in its parliament is expected that it will require Hong Kong's Legislative Council to pass legislation as soon as possible. In what form the LegCo will pass national security legislation, it is not known to us yet. But if China passes a legislation in its own parliament, directing the LegCo of Hong Kong to pass a national security legislation, then LegCo will have to do it because the foreign affairs and defense are in the hands of China. There is also suggestion by some that China actually will not direct the LegCo of Hong Kong. Rather, it can pass the law in its own parliament and dictate or impose that on Hong Kong. Because that will also not be strictly illegal, because foreign affairs and defense being in the hands of China. Since the final draft of the bill is not out yet, so we don't know what route China is going to follow. But definitely China is going to do something, and you have to keep a close eye on that. The sentiment of people of Hong Kong has been already brutally hurt because people perceive this to be a draconian law that China is preparing for. This can punish people for criticizing Beijing, as China has attempted to do this in the past. The bill will definitely stifle free speech and the right to protest because of the protests that have become more common in the past 10 years in Hong Kong. The activists in Hong Kong also have been doing lobbying in US, and because of that, US passed Hong Kong Human Rights and Democracy Act. As per this act, the executive, the President of United States, is authorized to impose sanction on China in case China attempts to stifle the democratic rights of the Hong Kong. But future attempts like this, or lobbying for democratic rights of Hong Kong, can easily be seen as secession and subversion, and that could call for very strict punishment. There is also a fear that judicial system of Hong Kong may start working like China. In China, the trials involving national security are conducted behind closed doors. It will be never clear what exactly the allegation and the evidence were. And the term national security in Chinese context is so vague that almost everything is covered by that. Also, you must have heard, polity is the guardian of economy. If you change the political rights, if you change the political ecosystem, if you change the liberties of people, that is going to hurt the business and economic activities. Hong Kong is an economic powerhouse, and restrictions on liberties never suit business. So this is the background and the power relation of China and Hong Kong, but exactly how China is going to restrict the liberties in Hong Kong, that we will come to know only in coming days.